Too young to vote, yet old enough to commit horrors. These teenage killers shocked the world and were sentenced to spend life behind bars. Tyler Lane Holder. On September 4, 2014, Tarrant County, Texas witnessed one of the most disturbing sentencing hearings involving a juvenile killer. Tyler Lane Holder, 17 years old, pleaded guilty to capital murder, attempted capital murder, and arson, receiving life in prison for the heinous acts against 6-year-old neighbor Alana Gallagher. His crimes had shattered a quiet Saginaw community's sense of safety. But how does a teenager living next door become capable of such calculated evil against an innocent child? On July 1, 2013, Holder abducted Gallagher from her street while she was playing outside. He then committed serious harm against the child, suffocated her by placing a plastic bag over her head, bound her body with duct tape, and dumped it in a tarp near a creek. He also attempted to burn evidence related to the crime. The investigation intensified when DNA evidence from Gallagher's body linked Holder to the crime, and neighbors' suspicions about his behavior contributed to his identification as a suspect. The community had noticed his strange behavior around the time of the disappearance. When police arrived to arrest him on July 23, 2013, Holder shot and wounded Officer Charles Lodato during the confrontation, adding attempted capital murder to his charges. Born around 1996 in Texas, Holder grew up in Saginaw, a suburb of Fort Worth. He was described as a typical teenager with no prior criminal record, but neighbors later reported suspicious behavior around the time of the crime. As a juvenile certified to stand trial as an adult, he pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding a potential death penalty due to his age. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder with parole eligibility after 50 years, 40 years for attempted capital murder, and 20 years for arson, all to run concurrently. Holder, now 29, is serving his sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Stiles Unit. He won't be eligible for parole until approximately 2064. With Tyler Lane Holder behind bars, the focus shifts to another teenage killer whose crimes terrorized an entire region: Lee Boyd Malvo. On March 10, 2004, Chesapeake, Virginia became the site of a landmark sentencing that captivated the nation. Lee Boyd Malvo, 17 years old during the crimes, was sentenced to life without parole for his role in the Beltway sniper attacks that terrorized the Washington, D.C. area. His 3-week reign of terror had paralyzed an entire metropolitan region. But how did a troubled teenager from Jamaica become one half of America's most feared killing team? From October 2nd, 2002, Malvo and accomplice John Allen Muhammad carried out a series of shootings across Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., killing 10 people and injuring 3 others. The attacks began on October 2nd, 2002, with random shootings using a Bushmaster XM-15 rifle fired from the trunk of a Chevy Caprice. Born February 18, 1985, in Kingston, Jamaica, Malvo had a turbulent childhood. He immigrated illegally to the U.S. in 2001, where he met John Allen Muhammad, who became a manipulative father figure. Malvo acted under Muhammad's influence, whom he viewed as a father figure. The manipulation was so complete that Malvo believed he was fighting a righteous war against society. The duo was caught on October 24, 2002, at a Maryland rest stop after a public tip following media broadcasts of their vehicle description and license plate. They were asleep in the car when arrested by federal and state authorities. In Virginia, he was tried first in Chesapeake for the murder of Linda Franklin on October 14, 2002. He was convicted of capital murder on December 18, 2003, but sentenced to life without parole on March 10, 2004, after the jury spared him the death penalty due to his age and manipulation by Muhammad. Following U.S. Supreme Court rulings banning mandatory life without parole for juveniles, Malvo's sentences were vacated for resentencing. A Maryland appeals court ruled in August 2022 that Malvo must be resentenced. The Virginia Parole Board denied his parole request in August 2022. In September 2024, Malvo's resentencing was indefinitely postponed as Virginia rejected a request to let him out of prison to attend Maryland court in person. Malvo is currently incarcerated at Keene Mountain Correctional Center in Virginia. As Malvo remained behind bars, Texas would witness a teen whose crimes were driven not by obsession, but by the twisted rush of taking a life. Pearl Moen. On January 20th, 2017, Austin, Texas witnessed the sentencing of a teenager whose crime was motivated by the most chilling reason imaginable: pure excitement about taking a life. Pearl Moen, 17 years old at the time of her crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the random stabbing attack on a 23-year-old woman who was napping in a park. Her own words would reveal the disturbing truth about her motivation. But what drives a teenager to hide in bushes and attack a complete stranger for the thrill of it? On November 14, 2015, Moen randomly stabbed the 23-year-old 21 times in Hyde Park, Austin, Texas. Moen hid in bushes outside an apartment complex, attacked the victim from behind as she walked home, leaving her to die on the sidewalk. The victim survived after emergency surgery. The motive appeared to be thrill-seeking, as Moen later wrote in her diary, "I stabbed an innocent woman to death earlier today. It was absolutely fantastic. Murder gives me a high unlike any other." These chilling words revealed a complete lack of remorse and a disturbing enjoyment of causing harm. Born around 1998 in Texas, Moen had a history of substance use and psychological issues, but no prior criminal record. She was a high school student in Austin at the time, described as troubled with mental health challenges. Moen was caught after police found her diary during a search related to the investigation, along with witness descriptions and evidence linking her to the scene. Her own written confession became the key evidence against her. She was charged with attempted murder. As part of a plea agreement, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with credit for time served. Her first parole review was in November 2017, which was denied. Moen is serving her sentence at the Hilltop Unit in Gatesville, Texas. After Moen's violent spree, another Texas teen would captivate headlines not just for crime, but for turning his escape into a viral hit. Tay K. On April 15, 2025, San Antonio, Texas witnessed the final chapter of a case that had captivated hip-hop culture and the criminal justice system. Taymor Trayvon McIntyre, known as rapper Tay K, was sentenced to 80 years in prison for his second murder conviction, to run concurrently with his previous 55-year sentence. His crimes had turned him from rising rapper into one of America's most notorious young killers. But how did a teenage rapper turn his criminal exploits into chart-topping music while on the run for murder? Born June 16, 2000 in Long Beach, California, McIntyre moved to Texas as a child. He grew up in Arlington with gang affiliations and pursued rap music, gaining fame with The Race while fugitive. In the first case, on July 26, 2016, at age 16, McIntyre participated in a home invasion robbery in Mansfield, Texas, where 21-year-old Ethan Walker was shot and killed during the robbery. A jury convicted him of murder on July 19, 2019, and sentenced him to 55 years in prison on July 23, 2019. He fled while on ankle monitor in March 2017, releasing the song The Race, glorifying his escape. The song became a viral hit, earning millions of views and turning his criminal flight into entertainment. While on the run, on April 23, 2017, at age 16, McIntyre robbed and fatally shot 23-year-old photographer Mark Anthony Saldivar in a Chick-fil-A parking lot in San Antonio, Texas, during a drug deal gone wrong. He was recaptured in Elizabeth, New Jersey on June 30, 2017. Tried as an adult in Behar County District Court, he was found guilty of murder on April 14, 2025, and sentenced to 80 years on April 15, 2025. The concurrent sentence means he effectively faces 55 years with parole eligibility after half the term. McIntyre is incarcerated at the John B. Connolly Unit, Karnes County, Texas. His case represents how social media and music can glorify criminal behavior among young people. From a teenage rapper turning his crimes into chart-topping hits, we now move to a teen who betrayed her own family in a chilling act of premeditated murder. Tia Marie Mitchell Skinner. On September 16, 2011, St. Clair County, Michigan delivered a sentence that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Tia Marie Mitchell Skinner, 17 years old at the time of her crime, was sentenced to mandatory life without parole for orchestrating the murder of her adoptive father and attempted murder of her adoptive mother. Her calculated betrayal of family trust had ended in tragedy. But what could drive an adopted teenager to recruit killers to eliminate the very people who had given her a home? On November 12, 2010, angry over strict rules, Skinner recruited two accomplices, Jonathan Kurtz and James Preston, providing them with maps and instructions to stab her parents while she waited outside. Her father, Paul Skinner, was stabbed over 20 times and died. Her mother, Mara Skinner, survived after being stabbed multiple times and identified the attackers. Born December 8, 1992, in Michigan, Skinner was adopted by Paul and Mara Skinner after her birth by a prison inmate. She was a high school student in Yale, Michigan, with conflicts over strict parental rules, including phone and dating restrictions. The planning was extensive and premeditated. Skinner provided detailed maps of the house, timing information, and specific instructions to her accomplices. She positioned herself away from the scene to establish an alibi while directing others to commit the act. The accomplices were caught fleeing the scene, and Skinner was arrested after her mother's testimony and evidence of her planning via text messages. Her electronic communications revealed the extent of her involvement in planning the attack. Skinner was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. Tried as an adult in St. Clair County Circuit Court, a jury convicted her on all counts. Following Miller v. Alabama, 2012, she was resentenced on July 11, 2013, again to life without parole after a hearing considering her youth. Skinner remains at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility serving life without parole. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases involving young killers, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Skinner's shocking premeditation closed one chapter. But in Houston, another teen would exploit affection and trust to deadly ends. Keona Samireal Mouton. On August 7, 2024, Houston, Texas witnessed the conclusion of a case that had shaken the prestigious Lamar High School community. Keona Samireal Mouton, who was 16 at the time of her crime, was sentenced to 23 years in prison for her role in luring classmate DeLindsey Mack to his death. Her manipulation of trust and friendship had led to a young man's murder. But how does a teenage girl exploit someone's feelings for her to set up their execution? On November 13, 2018, knowing Mack had a crush on her, Mouton texted him to meet outside the school for a supposed date, leading him to a wooded area where accomplice Kendrick Johnson ambushed, robbed, and fatally shot him during a botched robbery. The crime shocked the affluent River Oaks community where the school was located. Born around 2002 in Houston, Texas, Mouton was a student at Lamar High School with no detailed public family background. Reports suggest she lived a typical teen life before becoming involved in the robbery plot that would end in murder. The plan was cruel in its simplicity. Mouton knew that Mac had romantic feelings for her and used those emotions to lure him to an isolated location. She sent specific messages arranging the meeting, knowing that her accomplice would be waiting to rob him. Mouton was caught after police traced her communications with Mac and Johnson, along with witness statements. Her text messages provided a clear trail of evidence showing her role in setting up the victim. Mouton was charged with murder as a party to the crime and certified to stand trial as an adult. In the Harris County District Court, a jury convicted her in August 2024 after deliberating for several hours. She was sentenced to 23 years in prison with parole eligibility after half the term. Johnson was sentenced to life while a second shooter remains at large, demonstrating how some accomplices escape justice while others face the consequences. After Mouton manipulated a classmate's feelings for deadly gain, Wisconsin would see a far younger offender commit a shockingly brutal murder. Nathan Pop. On August 13, 2013, Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, delivered a sentence that would test every assumption about childhood innocence. Nathan Pop, only 13 years old when he committed his crime, was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years for the brutal murder of 78-year-old Barbara Olson. His case would redefine how the justice system views juvenile killers. But how does a 13-year-old child become capable of participating in such a horrific act against an elderly woman? On September 17, 2012, Papa and friend Antonio Barbeau murdered Barbeau's 78-year-old great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. Motivated by robbery for money, stealing $150 in jewelry, the boys entered Olson's home. Barbeau struck her with a hatchet, and Pop hit her with a hammer. Born around 1999 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Papa was a middle school student with no prior record. He became influenced by friend Antonio Barbeau in what started as a robbery-motivated crime, but escalated to unthinkable levels. After the murder, they hid the body in the garage, cleaned up, and buried evidence. The level of planning and cover-up showed a disturbing sophistication for such young perpetrators. The boys confessed after Barbeau bragged at school, leading to a tip. Police found blood evidence and the body. The casual bragging about such a serious crime revealed how disconnected they were from the gravity of their actions. Both were charged as adults with first-degree intentional homicide. Papa's trial in Sheboygan County Circuit Court began June 17, 2013, and a jury convicted him on June 20, 2013. He was sentenced considering his youth, but the crime's brutality resulted in life in prison with parole eligibility after 31 years. Appeals were denied in 2017. His parole eligibility won't come until 2043, when he'll be 45 years old. As Papa faced decades behind bars, another teen in Texas would make a fatal decision that destroyed both friendship and family hope. John Dewar. On January 8, 2025, San Antonio, Texas, concluded a case that had begun with hope for a new year but ended in senseless tragedy. John Dewar, 17 years old at the time of his crime, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for shooting and killing his friend Jaden Perez during a drug deal gone wrong on New Year's Eve 2023. His case represents how quickly teenage friendships can turn deadly. But what drives a teenager to kill someone he considered a friend over a drug transaction? On December 31, 2023, Dewar shot and killed friend Jaden Perez during a drug deal gone wrong. The New Year's Eve shooting shattered two families and ended what should have been a celebration. Born around 2006 in San Antonio, Texas, Dewar was a teenager involved in drug-related activities. No detailed family background is publicly available beyond the crime context, but his involvement in drug dealing at such a young age suggests a troubled path. The circumstances of the shooting suggest that what started as a routine drug transaction between friends escalated into fatal confrontation. The details of exactly what went wrong remain limited in public records, but the outcome was irreversible. Doer was arrested on February 29, 2024, as a person of interest. The investigation took nearly 2 months before authorities had enough evidence to make an arrest. He pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced in Bihar County to 30 years. By pleading guilty, he avoided a lengthy trial and the possibility of an even longer sentence. As Doer faced decades for killing a friend, another Texas teen would claim a controversial motive for a horrific act against a classmate. Hermilo Morales. On January 31, 2013, Brazoria County, Texas, witnessed the sentencing of a case that would become a flashpoint in discussions about hate crimes and immigration. Hermilo Vildo Morales, 19 years old at the time of sentencing, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for beating classmate Joshua Wilkerson to death with a wooden rod. His claim of gay panic defense would be rejected by the jury. But what drives someone to kill a classmate and then try to justify it based on alleged unwanted advances? On November 16, 2010, after giving Wilkerson a ride home from school, Morales beat him to death with a wooden rod, claiming Wilkerson made an unwanted advance. He bound Wilkerson's hands and feet, partially burned the body, and dumped it in a field. Born around 1991 in Belize, Morales was brought illegally to the U.S. at age 10 by his parents. He grew up in Pearland, Texas, attended high school with the victim, and was undocumented with no prior record. Morales confessed during police questioning on November 19, 2010, after being identified as the last person seen with Wilkerson. His confession provided details about the crime that only the perpetrator would know. The gay panic defense claimed that Morales acted in sudden passion after an unwanted advance. However, the extent of the injuries and the subsequent cover-up suggested premeditation rather than a moment of panic. In Brazoria County District Court, trial began in January 2013. A jury convicted him on January 29, 2013, rejecting the sudden passion defense. The jury saw through the defense strategy and focused on the brutality of the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole on January 31, 2013. Appeals were denied in 2014. Morales is at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Polunsky Unit. His case became a political talking point about immigration and crime, but at its core remains a story of a young life senselessly taken. After Morales claimed a controversial motive for murder, the next case would challenge the nation's approach to juvenile life sentences. Brett Jones. On April 22, 2021, the United States Supreme Court upheld a sentence that had sparked national debate about juvenile justice. Brett Jones, who was 15 years old when he murdered his grandfather, had his life without parole sentence confirmed in the landmark case Jones v. Mississippi. His case would reshape how courts handle juvenile life sentences across America. But what transforms a troubled teenager's family argument into a deadly assault on the person trying to help him? On August 9, 2004, during an argument over Jones's girlfriend staying in the home, Jones stabbed his grandfather, Burtis Jones, 8 times with a steak knife, and then a second knife after the first broke. The killing occurred in the kitchen, and Jones attempted to resuscitate him before fleeing. Born July 17, 1989, in Mississippi, Jones had a traumatic childhood with mistreatment from his stepfather, leading him to flee to his grandfather's home. He had no prior criminal history, but family conflicts had been escalating, The argument that led to the fatal stabbing centered on Jones's relationship with his girlfriend and his grandfather's rules about her staying in the house. What started as a typical teenage dispute escalated when emotions and anger overcame rational thought. He was caught nearby after police responded to the scene. Jones had attempted to help his grandfather after the stabbing, showing some immediate remorse, but it was too late to save him. Jones was charged with murder and tried as an adult in Lee County Circuit Court. A jury convicted him in 2005, and under Mississippi law at the time, he received a mandatory sentence of life without parole on August 12, 2005. Following Miller v. Alabama, 2012, he was resentenced on December 18, 2015, again to life without parole after a hearing considering his youth and rehabilitation potential. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the sentence on April 22, 2021, ruling no separate finding of permanent incorrigibility was required. Jones, 36, is at the Mississippi State Penitentiary serving life without parole. His case established important precedent about how juvenile life sentences can be imposed and reviewed. The stories of these 10 teenage killers reveal the darkest potential of youth when innocence is stripped away by violence, manipulation, and poor choices. Sarah Grace Patrick. On February 20, 2025, Carroll County, Georgia, became the scene of a family massacre that exposed the twisted intersection of murder and social media fame. Sarah Grace Patrick, just 14 years old, shot and killed her mother, Kristen Brock, and stepfather James Brock, then launched a calculated campaign to gain internet fame from their deaths. But what drives a teenage girl to murder her parents and then manipulate social media to become a viral sensation? After her younger sibling discovered the bloodied bodies, Sarah called 911, playing the devastated daughter. But her most disturbing behavior came afterward. She began posting grieving TikToks, reaching out to true crime bloggers, and urging online investigators to help solve her parents' murders while building a following of sympathetic viewers. The investigation revealed Sarah had been researching how to monetize trauma content before the murders. She viewed her parents' deaths as content creation opportunities, studying social media algorithms and engagement strategies. Her posts carefully crafted a narrative of a tragic survivor deserving donations and support. Sarah was arrested on July 8, 2025, after investigators discovered her digital footprint contradicted her victim narrative. Search histories showed her researching murder methods alongside monetization strategies for trauma content, revealing the calculating mind behind her grief performance. The case remains pending trial, but online manipulation for fame pales in comparison to the face-to-face execution planned with military precision in our next case. Carly Gregg. On March 19, 2024, Brandon, Mississippi, became the scene of a family massacre that horrified seasoned detectives. Carly Gregg, just 14 years old, executed her mother and attempted to murder her stepfather with a chilling calculation that defied her age and shocked investigators with its methodical nature. But what drives a teenage girl to invite friends over to see her mother's corpse and casually ask if they're squeamish around dead bodies? When Ashley Smiley discovered vape pens in Carly's bedroom during a routine drug search, the 14-year-old calmly retrieved a .357 Magnum and fired 3 shots into her mother. Security cameras captured her deliberate movements as she methodically planned her next move. Then she texted her friend with bone-chilling casualness, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" After showing her friend the corpse, Carly crafted an elaborate trap for her stepfather, sending text messages pretending to be her mother. When Heath arrived, expecting to find his wife, Carly was waiting in ambush. She shot him while telling her friend, "I put 3 in my mom and I got 3 more waiting for my stepdad." Her casual attitude toward double murder demonstrated a level of detachment that stunned investigators. On September 20th, 2024, after less than 2 days of trial, Carly was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, rejecting her insanity defense after hearing evidence of her calculated planning and emotionless execution. The next case shows how some teenagers become so consumed with the idea of killing that they treat murder like a recreational activity. Alyssa Bustamante. On October 21, 2009, St. Martin's, Missouri, became a hunting ground for one of history's most psychologically disturbing teenage killers. Alyssa Bustamante, 15, lured 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton into the woods to satisfy her morbid curiosity about what it would feel like to take another human life. But what kind of teenager describes killing an innocent child as amazing in her diary and digs graves in advance like a seasoned predator? At 6:15 p.m., Alyssa approached Elizabeth with a friendly invitation to play in the woods, and the trusting child eagerly followed her older neighbor. Once isolated, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth and stabbed her repeatedly with a kitchen knife she had brought specifically for this purpose. The most chilling evidence came from Alyssa's own diary. "I just fucking killed someone. It was amazing." She described getting over any initial shock and finding the act of murder genuinely enjoyable, treating it like a successful experiment. Alyssa had prepared methodically, digging 2 graves in the woods days earlier. Her YouTube profile listed cutting and killing people as hobbies, and she posted photos covered in fake blood, showing her long-standing obsession with violence. After murdering Elizabeth, Alyssa buried the body and attended church with her family the next morning, singing hymns as if nothing had happened. When Elizabeth was reported missing, Alyssa joined search parties while knowing exactly where the body was buried, her performance convincing everyone of her innocence. Alyssa had been in her grandparents' custody since 2002 due to her parents' drug problems and had attempted suicide around 2007. Despite her troubled background, mental health experts agreed that her calculated planning and lack of remorse indicated something far more sinister than typical teenage rebellion. Sentenced to life with parole possibility, Alyssa was denied parole in July 2024, with her next hearing in 2029. But killing for personal satisfaction is nothing compared to the ultimate betrayal committed by lifelong friends in our next case. Shelia Eddy. On July 6, 2012, Star City, West Virginia, became the scene of ultimate betrayal when friendship turned deadly. Shelia Eddy, 16, murdered her best friend Skylar Neese for the most trivial reason imaginable. She simply didn't want to be friends anymore and feared exposure of her secret. At 12:30 a.m., Shelia and Rachel Shoaff picked up their trusting friend Skylar from her bedroom window for what Skylar believed would be a fun night out. The 3 girls had been inseparable since age 8, sharing countless memories and deep bonds of childhood friendship. Instead of driving to their usual hangouts, Shelia deliberately drove to a pre-selected secluded area in Pennsylvania. On the count of 3, both girls began stabbing Skylar repeatedly until she collapsed and died, her final moments filled with confusion and betrayal by her closest friends. For months afterward, Shelia maintained an Academy Award-worthy performance. She helped distribute missing person flyers, organized search parties, comforted Skylar's devastated parents, and even appeared on local news, making tearful pleas for her best friend's safe return. Shelia's social media activity was particularly disturbing. She tweeted messages about missing Skylar, shared memories of their friendship, and expressed hope for her safe return. She attended vigils and memorial services, playing the grieving friend, while knowing exactly what had happened to Skylar. The motive was revealed when Rachel confessed. They killed Skylar because they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Shelia and Rachel were secretly romantically involved and feared Skylar might expose their relationship, so they chose murder over honest conversation. Shelia was sentenced to life with parole eligibility in May 2028. Throughout the investigation and trial, she showed no remorse, never publicly apologized, and maintained her cold, calculating demeanor that chilled everyone who encountered her. Our next case involves the same murder, but shows how one accomplice took a dramatically different psychological path. Rachel Schoaf. In the same brutal West Virginia murder that shocked the nation, Rachel Schoaf, 16, was Shalia Eddy's partner in killing their mutual best friend Skylar Neese, but displayed a completely different psychological response that would ultimately expose their crime. But what makes one teenage killer eventually confess and show apparent remorse while her partner maintains cold indifference? Rachel participated fully in the murder, helping lure Skylar to her death and assisting in burying the body. Like Shalia, she initially helped with the cover-up, distributing missing person flyers and comforting Skylar's family while hiding their involvement. However, Rachel's psychological makeup proved fundamentally different from her partner's. She began suffering severe anxiety attacks, panic episodes, and what appeared to be genuine guilt over their actions. Unlike Shalia's emotional detachment, Rachel claimed to have immediately felt remorse after the murder. The case finally broke when Rachel suffered a complete mental breakdown and confessed to the murder in January 2013, leading investigators to Skylar's remains. Her confession revealed shocking details about their planning and the trivial motive behind their friend's death. Rachel described crying and vomiting immediately after the killing, while Shalia remained emotionally detached and focused on maintaining their alibi. This psychological difference became crucial evidence in understanding the dynamics of their deadly partnership. Rachel led investigators to evidence, provided detailed accounts of their planning, and appeared to show genuine emotion when discussing the crime. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years with parole eligibility after 10 years. However, Rachel has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in July 2024, with her next hearing in 2026. The next case proves that family loyalty means absolutely nothing when teenage obsession and manipulation take complete control. Aaron Caffey. On March 1, 2008, Alba, Texas became the scene of a family massacre so comprehensive it shattered a small religious community. Aaron Caffey, 16, orchestrated the systematic murders of her mother and innocent younger brothers because her strict Christian parents had the audacity to disapprove of her relationship with an older, inappropriate boyfriend. But what kind of teenage girl provides detailed murder plans, family schedules, and architectural drawings to ensure her loved one's complete extermination while she waits outside listening to their dying screams? At 3:00 a.m., Aaron's boyfriend Charlie Wilkinson and armed accomplices crept into the Caffey family home carrying swords and guns, along with detailed plans Aaron had provided. She had given them precise information about sleeping arrangements, daily routines, and optimal timing for maximum efficiency. The attack was swift and merciless. Her mother, Penny, was nearly decapitated with a samurai sword, the blade cutting so deeply it almost severed her head completely. Blood splattered across walls and the ceiling as the violence reached unimaginable levels. Brothers Matthew, 13, and Tyler, 8, were shot multiple times at point-blank range as they slept peacefully, never having a chance to defend themselves or understand what was happening. The young boys died in terror and confusion, calling out for parents who could no longer help them. The Caffey family were devout Christians who attended Miracle Faith Baptist Church, where Terry served as youth pastor and Aaron sang in the choir. They had homeschooled their children to protect them from negative influences, never imagining the greatest evil would come from within. After ensuring all family members were dead, the killers set the house on fire to destroy evidence. Aaron waited outside during the entire massacre, showing no emotion as her home became her family's tomb. Miraculously, Father Terry survived despite multiple gunshot wounds and identified Aaron as the mastermind. He crawled from the burning house to a neighbor's home, immediately implicating his daughter in the murders. During interrogation, Aaron showed no remorse for her mother and brother's deaths, appearing more concerned about her boyfriend's fate. Her lack of emotion stunned investigators who couldn't comprehend such callousness. Sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 25 years, Aaron won't be eligible for parole until 2049. But systematic family annihilation is nothing compared to the prolonged sadistic torture motivated by petty teenage jealousy. Brittany Miller. On March 24, 2010, Pensacola, Florida became the scene of torture so prolonged and brutal it challenged investigators' understanding of human cruelty. Brittany Miller, 16, actively participated in the systematic torture and murder of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman over nothing more than jealousy about a boyfriend's affections. The torture began when Brittany discovered that Adriana had been romantically involved with a boy she liked. Rather than handling this typical teenage rivalry through normal means, Brittany enlisted her mother and neighbor in an elaborate plot to make Adriana suffer in unimaginable ways. They lured Adriana to their home under false pretenses, then began hours of systematic torture. They beat her repeatedly with a crowbar, breaking bones throughout her body, while Adriana begged them to stop and tried to understand why this was happening. When beatings weren't enough, they escalated by shocking her repeatedly with a stun gun, causing convulsions and burns while they watched and laughed. The electrical torture was applied to maximize pain while keeping her conscious to experience every moment of agony. The most horrific part came when they doused Adriana with gasoline and set her on fire, watching as flames consumed her skin. Her screams were so piercing that neighbors houses away could hear them, though none realized the true horror occurring. Adriana somehow survived the initial burning, but died 16 days later from complications. Her suffering was prolonged far beyond the torture session, as burns covered most of her body and internal injuries caused organ failure. Brittany actively participated with enthusiasm, seeking her mother's approval through increasingly violent acts. Witnesses described her as excited and engaged, genuinely enjoying Adriana's pain rather than participating reluctantly. Born June 2, 1993, Brittany had experienced childhood trauma including abuse and abandonment. However, experts agreed her background couldn't excuse the sadistic cruelty she displayed during the torture. Despite being juvenile, she was sentenced to life in prison, upheld in 2017 and 2019. Our next case demonstrates how manipulation and greed can drive a teenager to orchestrate the murder of the parent who loved her most. Courtney Schulhoff. On February 10, 2004, Altamonte Springs, Florida became the scene of calculated patricide that exposed the depths of teenage manipulation. Courtney Schulhoff, 16, orchestrated her devoted father's brutal murders because he had the audacity to try protecting her from a relationship with a much older criminal boyfriend. At 11:30 p.m., Courtney's boyfriend, Michael Morin, crept into their home carrying a baseball bat she had specifically selected for the murder. She had spent weeks providing detailed information about Stephen's sleeping habits, daily routines, and optimal timing for an undetected attack. Stephen Schulhoff was a devoted single father who had raised Courtney alone after his divorce, working multiple jobs to provide for her needs. He sacrificed his own happiness and social life to ensure she had opportunities, private schooling, and material advantages many families couldn't afford. Stephen's only crime was attempting to protect his daughter from Michael Morin, a homeless car thief 5 years older with extensive criminal records. When Stephen discovered the inappropriate relationship and tried to end it, Courtney decided her father had to die rather than lose her criminal boyfriend. The murder was particularly savage and prolonged. Morin attacked Stephen with the baseball bat as he slept, striking repeatedly in the head and body. The violence was so extreme that blood splattered across bedroom walls and ceiling, and Stephen's skull fractured in multiple places. During the prolonged beating, Courtney waited in another room, listening to sounds of her father being murdered while showing no emotional reaction. Her complete indifference to his suffering demonstrated absence of conscience or human empathy. After confirming Stephen was dead, they drove to McDonald's and ate calmly, as if returning from a normal date. Their behavior immediately following the murder showed complete absence of remorse or recognition of what they had done. The original plan involved disposing of Stephen's body by throwing it from a bridge into a river, making his death appear to be a disappearance rather than murder. However, they were arrested before implementing this additional deception. Initially, Courtney claimed Morin acted independently, and she had no knowledge of any murder plot. However, evidence, including her purchase of the murder weapon, proved she was the mastermind behind her father's death. Originally sentenced to life without parole, Courtney was resentenced to 40 years in 2017 due to juvenile sentencing law changes. The father killer chose a homeless criminal over the parent who had sacrificed everything for her future. If you've made it this far and crave the darkest criminal truths, hit the subscribe button. Your support keeps us digging deeper. But patricide motivated by selfish romance is nothing compared to America's first school shooting that changed the nation forever. Brenda Spencer. On January 29, 1979, San Diego became the scene of America's first modern school shooting that fundamentally changed the nation. Brenda Spencer, 16, opened fire on Cleveland Elementary School, killing 2 adults and injuring 9 others in an attack that established a horrifying template copied by countless killers for decades. At exactly 8:30 a.m. on a Monday morning, as students and teachers arrived for a normal day, Brenda positioned herself at her bedroom window directly across from the school and began systematically firing. Her elevated position provided clear views of the playground and entrance where children were most vulnerable. Brenda's first intentional target was 9-year-old Cam Miller, whom she shot simply because he wore blue clothing, her least favorite color. The arbitrary nature of victim selection demonstrated the random evil that would characterize future school shootings. Principal Burton Ragg and custodian Mike Suchar died as heroes, using their bodies to shield wounded children from continued gunfire. Both men consciously chose to place themselves between the shooter and students, sacrificing their lives in acts of courage. 8 children and 1 police officer were wounded before Brenda stopped shooting and barricaded herself inside her house. The victims suffered injuries ranging from minor wounds to life-changing disabilities that would affect them forever. When police negotiators asked why she committed mass murder, Brenda provided the infamous response, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." Her casual attitude toward killing children shocked America and challenged fundamental beliefs about violence and motivation. Brenda had grown up in extreme poverty with her alcoholic father after her parents' acrimonious divorce in 1972. She lived in squalid conditions and was essentially abandoned by her father, who showed little interest in her well-being or development. For Christmas 1978, Brenda had asked for a radio, but her father gave her a Ruger 10-22 rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition instead, the exact weapon she used for mass murder. Her later reflection, "I asked for a radio and got a rifle." During decades of incarceration, Brenda has repeatedly scratched, unforgiven, and alone into her own skin, demonstrating ongoing psychological issues and self-destructive tendencies that suggest continued danger. Sentenced to 25 years to life, Brenda has been denied parole at every hearing, most recently in February 2025. The school shooter remains caged for pioneering mass murder in American education. But even this historic act of terrorism pales compared to the pure evil displayed in our final case. Sharon Carr. In June 1992, Camberley, Surrey became the hunting ground for what criminologists consider Britain's most evil teenage killer. Sharon Carr, just 12 years old, murdered 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe by stabbing her 32 times in an unprovoked sexual attack so savage it earned her the nickname, the Devil's Daughter. At 11:30 p.m. on June 7, 1992, Katie Ratcliffe was walking home from her restaurant job, following the same safe route she had taken hundreds of times. She was a responsible young woman, earning money for her education, with no way of knowing a 12-year-old predator was stalking her through the darkness. Sharon attacked without warning, provocation, or rational motive, launching into a frenzied assault that was clearly sexual in nature. She stabbed Katie more than 30 times, deliberately prolonging the attack and inflicting wounds that showed she took time to torture her victim before delivering fatal blows. The murder went unsolved for 2 years, while Sharon continued normal school activities, maintaining perfect appearances while harboring her murderous secret. Her ability to compartmentalize and hide her true nature was extraordinary and deeply disturbing. The case broke when Sharon viciously attacked another student in June 1994, then began boasting about the earlier murder and revealing disturbing diary entries detailing her ongoing fantasies about the killing. The most psychologically disturbing evidence came from Sharon's diary. "If only I could kill you again. I promise I would make you suffer more this time, you fucking slag. Your terrified screams turned me on." The sexual gratification she derived from murder horrified investigators and mental health professionals. Sharon was born in Belize on December 21, 1979, and moved to England in 1986. Her childhood involved extreme poverty and witnessing her mother pour boiling oil on her stepfather during domestic violence. But even this traumatic background couldn't explain her level of evil. Sharon's dangerous behavior has continued and escalated during incarceration. She has repeatedly attacked prison staff and inmates, claimed to believe she's a reptilian creature rather than human, and once tried cutting herself to check if she would bleed like a person. Most chilling, Sharon carved Katie's name into her skin and has repeatedly expressed detailed desires to kill again. Prison psychiatrists describe her as one of the most dangerous individuals they've encountered, noting her complete absence of empathy and ongoing violent fantasies. Convicted in 1997 and sentenced to life with a minimum of 14 years, Sharon was denied parole in August 2023. Prison officials noted she continues to represent extreme danger to public safety, with no recent updates indicating any possibility of release. These girls may have been young, but their crimes left scars that time will never heal. Tristan Noah Borlaz. On April 10, 2019, Deep Gap, North Carolina, became the scene of a family massacre that would shock investigators to their core. The killer was Tristan Noah Borlaz, a 17-year-old who had just been punished for a poor school report, suggesting he might not graduate. What followed was an act of violence so calculated it defied comprehension. But what drove this teenager to transform a simple punishment into a double homicide? The Borlaz family was deeply religious, with Tanya Mai Borlaz known for her strict parenting and unusual behaviors, including screaming at art pieces she believed were demonic. She would lecture Tristan for hours at night, creating a suffocating atmosphere in their home with 8 children, including foster kids. The academic pressure and religious extremism created a powder keg waiting to explode. On that fateful day, Tristan stabbed his mother Tanya multiple times, also strangling her and striking her with blunt force. His father, Jeffrey David Borlaz, 43, was stabbed multiple times outside their home. The teenager then attempted to conceal the bodies and clean the crime scene, showing a chilling level of premeditation that suggested this wasn't a momentary loss of control. Tristan was caught the next day in Tennessee, driving his father's truck with blood on his clothing, alongside a female companion named Evelyn Faith Jackson. Evidence included surveillance footage and digital communications that revealed the full scope of his planning. On March 2, 2022, after a 2.5-week trial, Tristan was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Greg Horn sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole on March 3, 2022. The sentence was upheld by the North Carolina Court of Appeals in January 2024, ensuring this teenager will never taste freedom again. He remains in a North Carolina state prison, where he will spend the rest of his life paying for those few minutes of rage. But our next case proves that some teenagers can commit the unthinkable and still find ways to celebrate. Tyler Hadley. On July 16, 2011, Port St. Lucie, Florida, witnessed one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory. The perpetrator was Tyler Hadley, a 17-year-old who bludgeoned his parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, to death with a hammer, then did something that shocked even hardened investigators. He threw a party over their corpses. But what kind of teenager kills his parents, then invites friends over to celebrate? Tyler had a history of drug use, criminal behavior including arson and vandalism, and ongoing conflicts with his parents who wanted to enroll him in drug treatment. On that fateful Saturday night, those tensions reached a deadly crescendo. His parents' decision to send him to rehab felt like the ultimate betrayal to a teenager already spiraling out of control. After murdering Blake Hadley, 54, and Mary Jo Hadley, 47, Tyler spent 3 hours methodically cleaning up the scene. He then posted on Facebook, inviting friends to a party at his house. What his guests didn't know was that his parents' bodies were hidden in the master bedroom just down the hall from where they were drinking and laughing. The party continued for hours, with Tyler appearing normal and even cheerful. Dozens of teenagers drank, socialized, and enjoyed themselves while 2 corpses lay decomposing nearby. But as the night wore on, the weight of his crimes began to show. Tyler confessed to his friend Michael Mandel during the party, who initially didn't believe him until Tyler showed him the bodies. Mandel waited 4 agonizing hours before calling police, leading to Tyler's arrest early the next morning. Tyler pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder in February 2014. Initially sentenced to life without parole, his sentence was later reduced due to juvenile sentencing reforms, and he was resentenced to life with review after 25 years on December 20, 2018. He remains incarcerated at Gulf Correctional Institution, where he gave an interview in November 2024 discussing his crimes, showing little remorse for the lives he destroyed. Our next case takes us to Michigan, where a family gathering became a scene of unimaginable carnage. Seth Privacki. On November 29, 1998, Muskegon, Michigan became the site of a Thanksgiving massacre that would haunt the community forever. The killer was Seth Privacki, an 18-year-old who used a .22 caliber Ruger to execute 5 family members during what should have been a peaceful holiday gathering. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was systematic extermination that turned gratitude into grief. But what could drive a teenager to slaughter his entire family on Thanksgiving? Seth shot and killed his parents, Stephen Privacki, 50, and Linda Privacki, 49, his grandfather John Privacki, 78, his brother Jedediah Privacki, 19, and his brother's girlfriend April Boss, 19. Each victim was killed execution-style during a delayed Thanksgiving gathering, turning a day of gratitude into a nightmare of blood and terror. The methodical nature of the killings suggested a complete break from reality. The motive remains unclear, though investigators found evidence of family disputes and control issues. Seth had a history of juvenile theft charges and was on antidepressants, suggesting underlying mental health and substance abuse issues. But nothing in his background prepared anyone for the scale of violence he would unleash. Family members described him as quiet and withdrawn, giving no warning of the monster lurking beneath. Seth was caught the next day, November 30, 1998, after being spotted running from a barn. When confronted by police, he immediately confessed to the murders, showing no remorse for wiping out nearly his entire bloodline. His friend Stephen Clayton Wallace was initially charged with helping dispose of the weapon, but was later acquitted. Seth pleaded no contest, and was convicted of 5 counts each of first-degree murder and felony firearm charges. On May 27, 1999, he was sentenced to life without parole. But Seth's story didn't end in prison. On July 15, 2010, he was killed during a failed escape attempt at Kinross Correctional Facility, meeting a violent end that mirrored the carnage he had created 12 years earlier. The next case shows us how